Welcome back to the afternoon session of the final day of the PMTC's annual conference. Just before we complete the educational portion of our conference, I want to take a second to acknowledge our sponsor for this seminar, Home Hardware. Please take a moment to view this message from one of our longtime members.
This commercial is for the Pazants, for the Ho family, Sophie and Philippe, for the Kurzaks, the Bushers, and the Flanagans. All the home hardwares across Canada. Local, family-owned businesses who support the specific needs of their communities. Because when local supports local, local stays local. And that's what being locally owned, genuinely Canadian is all about.
Thanks again to Home Hardware for their support excuse me, of this seminar. In the final educational seminar of the conference, Brian Mofford, VP of Government Experience at Intelligent Imaging Systems and DriveWise Inc., will take a retrospective view of 2020 and how innovative technologies were used by carriers, deployed by vendors, and leveraged by law enforcement to enhance driver and public safety during a pandemic. Brian will present pilot project data, carrier testimonials, and feedback from the front lines to highlight the ways all levels of the industry rose to the challenge. Brian works closely with both state and federal law enforcement, as well as safety agencies to address their needs for roadside and software systems designed to automate the processing, inspection, and screening of trucks. I'm now going to queue up Brian's pre-recorded presentation. When Brian's presentation has concluded, as we have with all the speakers, we will bring Brian on live to answer any questions that you may have posed in the chat window, the webinar platform. Remember, hit the Q&A option to direct these questions towards Brian, and we will bring them on at the end. Now, Brian's presentation is a little bit shorter than the rest. His recording is only roughly 17 minutes long. So we will be back a bit earlier with this one. Hope you enjoy the presentation, and we will see you back here in about 17 minutes. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to attend this session. It's been over a year since we've been dealing with COVID-19, so it's hardly new to us now, yet it continues to change our lives as we slowly start to see things return to a new normal. However, there wasn't much precedence for us to fall back on in March 2020 when it was declared a pandemic and governments at all levels were faced with how to deal with the sudden closure of all services except those deemed essential. At DriveWise, we work closely with many agencies in the transportation and public safety space. So today, I would like to review some of the challenges that these agencies faced early on and some of the things our company did to help address some of these wherever we could. My name is Brian Mofford, Vice President of Government Experience, and my team and I work closely with our agency partners on making sure that the products, programs, and services we're bringing to market at DriveWise help to address their challenges when it comes to improving safety while increasing the efficiency of the primary freight networks our industry travels on every day. First, a little bit of background on our company. Intelligent Imaging Systems is our parent company, and they've been providing industry-leading road safety equipment and software services to government, transportation, and law enforcement agencies across North America since 2002. This is some of the technology you might see as you drive into a weigh station, sensors embedded in the pavement to imaging equipment and measuring devices mounted on poles and columns, all the way to the software systems that parse the information coming off these sensors and ties it together with information coming from provincial, state, and federal data systems. This gives inspection officers real-time data to aid them in the inspection process and the management of their commercial vehicle programs. With this background in the screening process of commercial vehicles in station, it led to the development of our mainline pre-clearance program, which was spun off in 2012 as DriveWise. I've been fortunate to be involved with the concept from the very beginning, and it's been fantastic to watch the program expand to 48 states and 2 provinces as of today. First, let me give you a bit of an intro to our technology, as understanding how it works will give you some insight in how we were able to respond to some of the challenges I'll be talking about. Way station bypass had been around long before we came out with our program, and the traditional way of delivering the service was through RFID, using a dedicated transponder in the cab of the truck and the infrastructure at roadside. So the poles and RFID readers needed to identify these transponders as they pass by and to communicate a pass-fail response back to the transponder. So the expansion of these programs to additional locations was happening slowly and was further hindered by the fact that in some jurisdictions, inspection locations are deployed in rest and pull-in areas or mobile locations where additional infrastructure is not realistic. So we were looking for an approach that could extend the current programs into more jurisdictions and into more sites. We thought if we could leverage existing infrastructure, we could reduce the costs and speed up the pace of deployment and make way station bypass conducive at any inspection site. The convergence of technology in the mobile and wireless space around that time meant that more than half of us were carrying in our pockets devices that could pinpoint our location and deliver messages to us wirelessly. The 2 key components needed to deliver a pre-clearance program. And the trucking industry was already ahead, as many fleets had already been using telematics devices in the cabs of the truck long before they were mandated to aid not only in messaging to drivers, but to deliver other services such as routing, scanning, pre-inspection reporting, etc. So by leveraging the GPS chipsets in mobile devices, we developed a system based on geofencing, where an area of interest is defined by 2 or more GPS coordinates, and use those as triggers to identify when a vehicle is approaching an inspection facility, when to send a pre-clearance request, when to deliver a decision back to the device, and to verify if the vehicle complied with the in-cab instruction. And we could communicate through this, through existing cellular connections, without having to install additional roadside hardware and display all of the relevant information to officers in the inspection facility, along with the instructions being provided to the drivers. Our platform is a real-time location-based, always-on cloud and roadside connected technology. This allows us to provide in-cab alerts to drivers anywhere, whether there is, for example, a physical way station or a roadside turnout or any area of interest to a commercial vehicle driver. Essentially, everything is a virtual geofence location, which can trigger any relevant business logic we need for that area. Since launching the service, we've partnered with many of the leading telematics and ELD providers in North America. Our in-cab technology is made available to partners through a software development kit, allowing for tight, seamless integration, allowing it to adapt easily to meet each platform's specific needs or requirements. And as we add more services to the in-cab experience, these integrations allow our partners to automatically extend these to their end users with little effort on their side. Now, we believe this is vitally important to realizing the gains in both efficiency and safety sought through connected truck technology. This flexible design built into our platform proved to be valuable as way stations were repurposed during the early days of the pandemic. We were already notifying trucks when way stations were closed, but when agencies started using way stations for reasons other than compliance, we were able to dynamically change our messaging to drivers in cab to provide additional instructions. For instance, at one point, Florida had converted a couple of the way stations located along the state borders with Alabama and Georgia into COVID screening facilities. All vehicles were to report to these stations as they crossed into the state, except for commercial vehicles. And we worked with the state to give drivers advanced warning messages and instructions as to which lanes they should use. We saw other jurisdictions use way stations as screening checkpoints, but also as mustering points for trucks tasked with distributing emergency supplies. Others were turned into rest areas or extended truck parking options to road weary drivers. And local groups would sometimes use these facilities as an opportunity to provide drivers with a free lunch as a way to show their appreciation. In all these cases, we worked with our partners to deliver appropriate messaging to drivers as they approach these facilities. To this day, we're still monitoring various situations as they develop. Long-haul drivers can find it challenging to get vaccinated, particularly if they are outside of their home jurisdiction for lengthy periods of time. Last month, North Dakota started offering vaccinations to Canadian truck drivers as they cross the Manitoba border. And the Blackfeet tribe in Montana were offering vaccinations to anyone who wanted it as they crossed over the border from Alberta. That is until it was recently canceled. So we're happy to continue to support these initiatives in conjunction with our agency partners as needed. In March of last year, agencies had to grapple with the impact of work from home orders and what that meant for those services performed by employees that were not deemed as essential. All of a sudden, you had staff that maintained facilities such as rest areas unable to perform their duties in the field. This led to the sudden closure of a number of rest areas and truck parking facilities across the country. And truck parking was already considered a major challenge for drivers prior to the pandemic, and these sudden closures exacerbated the issue even further. So just as in the situation around weigh stations, we were able to quickly adapt messaging in and around these areas to give drivers advance warning as to the availability of these facilities. And we could adjust our messaging in real time as the status of these facilities would change on a daily basis, whether crews were able to get on site and service them or not. Prior to the pandemic, we were already planning on adding more messaging around truck parking to our service, as a handful of jurisdictions have deployed technology within their truck parking facilities that can automatically track and report the number of available parking spots. And this information is provided in real-time feeds. So while we were looking at integrating with these feeds, we were probably 8 to 12 months out on our roadmap in early 2020. But with the sudden urgency around parking facilities, we accelerated our efforts, and shortly after we released our first few rest area alerts, we were able to add real-time availability information for parking facilities in Indiana. As the situation started to stabilize and we saw rest area facilities return to normal operating procedures, we began to turn off rest area open-close messages, but we've continued to add truck parking availability notifications as we integrate with more agency truck parking information feeds. Today, we provide real-time availability alerts in 9 jurisdictions. Though this information is sometimes provided on fixed message boards, these are typically installed 50 to 75 kilometers upstream of these facilities. But since we can geofence any location, we can use these as triggers in different areas, giving the driver updated availability information as they get closer to the facility. Like many businesses, we were quite concerned about the impact the shutdown and the ongoing pandemic might have on our business and the industry. What was clear, though, was the need to keep trucks on the road and the flow of goods moving. So while we expected we might see a slowdown in the adoption of our services, in fact, we had many customers expedite their deployment because they could make it part of their COVID plan right away. And with our software-based approach, our customers could extend the service to the entire fleet with the push of a button rather than having to administer and distribute additional hardware. So in addition to the new alerts we started to bring online, a lot of attention was being drawn to the existing safety alerts that we had been providing as part of our service for a few years prior to the pandemic. As a bit of a background, our DriveWise safety notification service was born out of concepts brought to us by some of our earliest agency partners in the DriveWise pre-clearance program. Given that we had the flexibility to alter messaging on in-cab displays, these partners had begun to identify locations in their jurisdictions where Though there may be posted signage, they were seeing a number of incidents still with commercial vehicles. We started getting a number of these types of requests from our agency partners, but we really weren't sure what kind of impact providing in-cab notifications in these areas would have on driver behavior. So back in 2017, we did a pilot study with 6 agencies where they curated locations within their jurisdictions that were identified as high rollover locations, had posted signage in the area, but had experienced a recent incident with a commercial vehicle. We then geofenced these areas and, without providing any in-cab messages, collected data on driver behavior in these locations. After a period of time, we started to provide in-cab messages to a group of drivers, bringing their attention to the upcoming rollover zone, and analyze the driver's reactions before and after receiving the in-cab message. Over the course of the pilot across all locations, we noted a 19% reduction in overspeeding events with those drivers that received the in-cab message compared to those who did not get a message. Similar to high rollover locations, geofences can be placed on approaches to bridges that may be lower than usual and have proven to be problematic in the past for commercial vehicles. Geofences can be placed upstream of all directions approaching the bridge and be used to not only alert the driver, but to also display the height of the bridge, allowing the driver to determine if it is safe to proceed or if they should detour. We have also added geofences along certain mountain passes in the country. These fences are used to remind drivers while they are on steep grades to be mindful of their vehicle's brake temperature and to avoid overheating. This can be particularly valuable to drivers who don't have much experience or training on mountain driving. And while the adoption of the safety notification service steadily grew over time, we really saw it jump in the spring of 2020. The pandemic really urged fleet managers to take a look at what they could do to increase the safety of their drivers. And while focused primarily on ways to minimize the possible exposure to COVID, we saw a real surge in interest for all of our safety-related services. And with these notification services, we've been providing detailed reporting to fleet managers and safety supervisors, showing them the number of alerts given to each truck and their driver's behavior through each of these zones. In cross-referencing the data collected within these risk zones with incident data collected by some of our fleet customers, we've been able to identify trends with those drivers that tend to continue to display riskier driving tendencies in spite of these warnings, and a correlation to the number of incidents experienced within the fleet. So as we're seeing the number of truck-related incidents steadily increase over the last year in almost every jurisdiction, being able to identify and follow up with these drivers proactively can go a long way in reducing future incidents for the fleet. We also provide aggregate information to our agency partners, and the growing volume of trucks receiving these alerts has reignited interest by the agencies to get relevant and meaningful information out to the commercial vehicles on their primary freight network. Provincial and state agencies started reaching out to their districts and regional groups, getting them to scrutinize the locations where we were providing these alerts and giving us feedback. With their input, we've curated a number of additional locations, and over the past year, the number of locations where we give these safety alerts has grown by 35%. And it hasn't just been our agency partners that have driven these changes. Many of our industry customers have responded positively to our truck parking messages and have been asking for the ability to provide locations of interest that are meaningful to their business or fleet with tailored messaging for their drivers. This again was another service that was on our roadmap that we accelerated and launched in October of 2020. As our Safety Plus service. It provides the tools for our fleet customers to tailor messaging to specific locations of interest that are delivered in cab just to their drivers. So while it's certainly been a challenging period for both individuals personally and businesses of all sizes, we've really seen increased collaboration and cooperation between our industry and agency partners at a level we had not seen prior to the pandemic. As we start to see restrictions relax in all parts of the country and we start getting back to business as usual, we hope to keep the momentum going and continue innovating with our partners as we look to further improve the safety and efficiency of our freight network through connected vehicle technology. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you would like any additional information on anything I spoke on today. Thanks again for attending today's session, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, Brian, there you are. I'm going to stop the share so we can get a bit of a bigger screen here. Perfect. Thanks for that presentation, Brian.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Problem. We do have we got more time for Q&A because the presentation was a little shorter, and that's great. And we did have a number of questions that came up. So first one I have here for you: can you share the Canadian provinces where your pre-pass services function, and in provinces that are not supported for pre-pass, do the safety alerts, parking alerts, etc., does everything else work in the Canadian jurisdictions?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and we do get that a lot. So today, our pre-clearance program is available in Alberta and Ontario, and we just recently enabled the ability to screen out-of-province vehicles in Ontario. We hope to be able to offer a similar level of service in Alberta here in the very near future. We're very close to being able to roll that out. So today, the Alberta pre-clearance is only available to Alberta-based carriers or Alberta-plated vehicles, whereas in Ontario, it's available to any vehicle. As far as the safety alerts go, we have safety alerts in every single jurisdiction. So right across the country, we have rollover notifications, steep grade notifications, low bridge notifications, and our Safety Plus service for our industry customers. They can put custom notifications anywhere they choose.
Okay, so in other words, even if you're not partnering with the jurisdiction for the bypass services, etc., everything else still works.
That's correct. Yeah.
So one person types in they're concerned about driver distraction. How often would any one driver typically receive alerts? Yeah,
so driver distraction was something we had in mind from day one when we first came up with the pre-clearance program. So the way the software is built, the software is an always-on application running in the background of an electronic logging device or telematics device. It doesn't require any interaction from the driver. And it was designed with Transport Canada and FHWA's standards around driver distraction, and it meets all their requirements. When we're not tracking the vehicle at all times, either the geofences are actually stored on the device itself, and they're just used as triggers to wake up the software. So as the vehicle's approaching either a safety area or a pre-clearance site, the software wakes up, presents itself at the front of the screen, notifies the driver with both an audible and visual alert. Provides the message, and then depending on the message, it will automatically expire after a certain period of time, and then just convert back to the background. As far as the number of notifications go, it really depends in what areas drivers are in. Typically, in a let's say in a rural mountain pass, a driver might see one or two notifications. It might be a steep grade notification, it might be a chain up location, what have you. In the case of some of our dangerous slowdown alerts or congestion alerts, a driver will only see it if it's relevant. So if a driver is on the Trans-Canada and there are no dangerous slowdown events occurring at that time, the driver won't see anything. Really, we try to minimize the number of alerts that we provide a driver. One, because of driver distraction, and two, we're concerned that if you start to over alert a driver, you're going to start to lose the efficacy of those alerts and what the intentions are. So we really do try hard to limit the number of notifications a driver might see.
Okay. Yeah, the over alerts, I guess we could relate back to when car alarms first came out. Like a thief could pretty easly steal a car alarm. Now, a car now with an alarm going off because nobody pays attention to it.
Exactly. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
on that point about the alerts, though, kind of a follow-up comes in mind. Does the driver have the option to opt out of some of the customs alerts? Because maybe some of the drivers don't, maybe a driver doesn't care about parking availability if he's a local driver who goes home every night as an instance, or so can drivers customize and turn alerts on and off similar to what you can do with your smartphone?
Yeah, currently they can't.
Okay.
The decision is kind of put in the hands of the safety supervisors of the fleets.
Okay.
So if it's an owner operator who has bought the service for themselves, they could opt in or out. But when it comes to the fleet, the safety supervisor would have control of that and whether or not their drivers see alerts.
Okay. So the fleet, but the fleet can opt in and out of some alerts then, I guess, just not individual drivers.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. How do you continue to update your alerts for changing road conditions or construction, COVID restrictions, et cetera, when they were changing so fast? I guess how is this done and how often is it updated to make sure it's accurate?
Yeah, so in some cases, it's a manual effort on our side where we're working very closely with our agency partners. Rest area alerts were a perfect example where every morning the situation changed. So we would have somebody from our side communicating directly with somebody within the transportation agency to get the latest and greatest information. In some cases, we actually integrate directly with traffic information management systems, depending on the robustness of the data within it. If it's real-time information that you can get, say, from a 511 system or a traveler information system, we'll integrate with that and we'll use that in real time as triggers. We do partner with some other third-party data providers that do traffic management sort of data collection, real-time data collection. As an example, we just released a product with in conjunction with INRIX in the state of North Carolina, where the INRIX information is detecting dangerous slowdown and congestion alerts in real time on North Carolina's highways. The minute they detect one of those, it triggers notification to our system, and which in turn automatically triggers a notification to any drivers in and around that area. So multiple different ways. Everything we do though is always curated with our agency partners first. So I mentioned the high rollovers and low bridges. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of low bridges, in a particular province. We don't geofence all of them, just the ones that tend to be problematic.
Before I move to another question that just popped up on the screen, you mentioned agency partners. What do you consider an agency partner? Are you talking private companies? Are you talking law enforcement, government agencies? Like, who are the agency partners?
Yeah, it's typically government agencies or enforcement agencies. In the case of the pre-clearance program, it's with whichever agency is the lead around commercial vehicle enforcement. So in Ontario, it's MTO. In Alberta, it's the sheriff's department. But we also partner with the transportation agencies when it comes to things like our safety notifications. For instance, a lot of that information is given to us from Alberta Transportation, or in the United States, it might be the DOT or Department of Public Safety.
Okay. And I'm going to have another follow-up on what you talked about as well. You mentioned truck parking spots. Is this for every rest stop, or how did you decide where to give the alerts, where the alerts would come from? Is it every jurisdiction, and if so, each rest area? Like, I guess the question would be, how the app is telling a driver where there's parking available, but is it taking into account every parking spot in that area?
Yeah, so if it's a province or state-owned rest area, and the situation at that rest area was changing, was dynamic, we would notify. We'd put notifications in there. In some cases, some provinces, there were no changes to the rest areas, so we didn't do anything new or different in those locations. Now, when it comes to the actual number of available spots, we'll only integrate that with the systems that manage and monitor that in real time. So there are some applications out there that will do crowdsourcing of truck parking information. We don't do that. And again, it goes back to sort of our number one criteria of driver distraction. We don't want drivers to have to interact with our application at any given time. So, unfortunately,
there's only about 12 or 13 jurisdictions that have that sort of real-time feed available today. The good news is we're tracking upcoming changes around truck parking, and there's a number of jurisdictions that have come out with RFPs very recently. So this need to install technology that can monitor and track real time the number of parking availabilities, we expect that to really grow here over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and back when we were legally allowed to cross the Canada-US border, not have to quarantine when we got home, unless truck drivers still can, but if it's non-essential travel, you can't. You look at states like Ohio, Michigan are perfect examples, especially Ohio does a good job. They actually have the signs right on the side of the interstate that updates how many parking spots are available in each rest area as you're driving by from the road, similar to what you see in some parking garages. So.
Yeah, what was interesting when we went down this road, Iowa has the technology in all of their state-owned truck parking facilities, but they had no variable message boards. So the only way you could get real-time information was if you went to their website. Of course, the driver's not going to do that.
Well, not when he's driving, we hope.
Yeah, exactly right. So,
do you have any integrations with truck navigation software such that your notifications will display even when a driver is using a navigation app, as an example, on their tablet?
So we don't integrate directly with any of the navigation products. We partner with a lot of those companies, and they do a great job, at truck routing and navigation. So we don't compete with them on that aspect of it. In the case of a driver using a nav app on an ELD, for instance, that nav app will have priority up until we have a safety notice. So we've worked with our vendor partners where should a safety alert pop up, our software will get the priority for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever the threshold is. We'll show the driver the notification, then we'll disappear again in the background, and the nav app will then regain priority.
Okay. There were many exemptions to expiring products. 15 months later, there still are in some jurisdictions. Ontario being one that still is extending driver's license as an example. But some other products related to your truck app would be IRP and IFTA registration. Did you have to account for this in your products, and how did you account for this in your products?
Yeah, we had to account for that definitely on the pre-clearance program, as validation of IRP and IFTA registration, for instance, or just vehicle registration period, is typically one of the screening criteria enforcement use as to whether or not a vehicle will get a bypass. What's unique about our program is DriveWise doesn't make the screening decision. All of the tools required to set up the rules and criteria are provided to enforcement, and we'll assist enforcement, of course, with how to set it up, but they have 100% control. So it's really up to the jurisdiction to decide if a valid IRP registration, for instance, is part of their criteria. We did notice, almost immediately, as all of these exemptions came into play, a lot of our agency partners reached out to us for assistance to help turn those things off. We are noticing now, like you mentioned, some of them have expired. June 1, actually, quite a few jurisdictions expired their exemptions around IRP and IFTA and are now screening again on those things. And an MTO, for instance, was screening on CVOR certificates. So I think if you had a expiring CVOR certificate up until, I think it was as recent as May 31st, you could continue to get bypasses, but I believe that's been rescinded since June 1st.
Yeah, well, they were actually in Ontario, as an example, was still allowing annual safety inspections to be expired as well, and that just ended on June.
That just ended too, yeah.
So, and I don't think this will make any difference, but how do the alerts work for fleets crossing from Canada into the US, vice versa? I'm assuming it'd be no different than crossing a state or provincial border.
Yeah, no different. And if you were crossing a border that had some sort of unique messaging, like I mentioned, the availability of vaccinations in some cases, They would just reach out to us. We would drop a new geofence right across the border, and then just give somebody a message saying, hey, if you're not vaccinated yet, ask your friendly neighborhood enforcement officer.
All right, and I had one final one come in on my phone here. Earlier you talked about, congestion, and it'll alert you if it's appropriate, if the congestion is an issue. Who determines if it's an issue? Who determines if it's risky? How do you determine if it's risky? Because, one could think, I'm sitting here in our office in Milton. When you drive, head east on the 401 into Toronto, most days it's going to be congestion from here right through to about Oshawa. So it would constantly be alerting, but how do you determine what is going to provide an alert? Is it if the traffic comes to a complete stop, if it slows down by a certain percentage, or?
Yeah. So in high congestion areas that typically congest around certain periods of time of the day, we wouldn't even provide alerts in that particular area. In those cases, what we might do is provide dangerous slowdown alerts. And so if sensors started to detect a change in speed by as much as, say, 30 kilometers an hour or more, then that might be classified as dangerous. And we do work with the agencies to ask them, what do they consider a dangerous slowdown event? And our system is configurable. So if an agency says, well, we want to alert vehicles, of a change of a delta of 30 kilometers an hour, or, in another jurisdiction might say, well, 40 kilometers an hour and up. So we'll use those as the thresholds. If a vehicle is already below the threshold, so for instance, if it goes from, 110 down to 70, and the vehicle's already traveling at, 70 or 65, we're not going to alert that vehicle. That driver already knows he's in a slowdown event. Really, the goal there is to not just give the driver the information, but to provide sort of the follow-on incidents that tend to occur when you have sudden slowdowns, the secondary incidents, the back end of the queue type of challenges that we see that commercial vehicles are faced with, especially.
Okay. I don't have any other questions up. Is there anything else you would like to add before we let you go?
No, that's, it's, we do appreciate the feedback we get from, organizations like yourself, and your constituents. This is how we continue to innovate. It's that type of feedback that we get from the folks that are on the road using our applications every day, that tend to drive the direction of our next features. So we appreciate the feedback and the ongoing collaboration.
All right. Well, thanks for taking time out of your day to pre-record the presentation. Tell our speakers, kind of like for us too, a virtual event actually takes more time away from a speaker than an in-person event, because you have to take the time to record it ahead of time, and then you have to take the time to join us in person. So
it's a unique challenge for sure.
So thanks for
looking
taking
forward to when we
time.
can meet again in person, though.
Yeah, well, we're hoping for next year's conference in June, that's for sure.
Right.
We will make a donation on your behalf to the truck convoy for Special Olympics. We donate $1,000 to the truck convoy in the name of our speakers, as opposed to giving out speaker gifts. So
that's great. Very much appreciated.
right, so again, Brian, thanks for the time. Thanks for contributing to our conference, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Take
Thanks,
care.
folks. Bye.